January 23rd, 1959. The platform at Sverdlovsk Station is a cacophony of hissing steam and the crunch of thick, iron-gray snow. A group of young explorers shares boisterous laughs and warm embraces, their rucksacks stuffed with heavy furs, primitive wooden skis, and the boundless ambition of youth. This was the Dyatlov group, 10 elite students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. In the heart of the Cold War, a high-stakes mountain trek wasn't just a hobby. It was a rite of passage, the ultimate test of Soviet grit. Their leader, Igor Dyatlov, was only 23 but possessed a stoic maturity that commanded absolute respect. Standing in the freezing mist, his eyes were fixed on the northern horizon. Beside him stood the group's enigma, 37-year-old Semyon Zolotaryov. Nearly 2 decades older than the others, Zolotaryov was a combat veteran with a shadowy past, rumored to have conducted special ops during World War II. This mix of youthful fire and veteran iron should have been a failsafe. Instead, it was a recipe for a nightmare. They planned a 16-day trek through the most treacherous reaches of the Ural Mountains. But before they could even reach the heart of the wilderness, a small twist of fate intervened. 22-year-old Yuri Yudin suffered a flare-up of chronic rheumatism, the pain so blinding he could barely stand. On January 28th, he bid a tearful goodbye to his comrades at the edge of the frontier. He didn't know it then, but that debilitating pain was his golden ticket, the only reason he would escape the Reaper's scythe. The remaining 9, 7 men and 2 women, skied deeper into the dead silence of the tundra. As the elevation climbed, the temperature plummeted to a bone-shattering -30°C. While passing through a dense, ancient forest, they discovered strange symbols carved into the bark, markings of the Mansi, an indigenous tribe that has survived these peaks for millennia. In the Mansi tongue, the mountain looming ahead had a name that should have served as a final warning: Kholat Shakhl. Translated literally, it means "don't go," or more chillingly, the Mountain of the Dead. Why don't go? Was it the lethal eternal winds, or the spirits whispered to guard the summit? On February 1st, a sudden, violent blizzard swallowed the group. Visibility dropped to less than 5 meters. The wind howled through the valleys like a prehistoric beast. Dyatlov, making a textbook professional decision, ordered the group to pitch camp on the slope, rather than risk losing their way in the whiteout. Recovered diaries show they were still joking that night, sharing a last meal of cured fat, even editing a satirical newsletter. But behind the smiles, the final photo on the camera roll tells a different story. A blurry, chaotic shot of eerie light orbs floating in the pitch-black sky. That night, tucked inside their sleeping bags, the 9 adventurers listened to the canvas rattle in the gale. They believed they just had to survive until dawn. They had no way of knowing that on this mountain of the dead, a force beyond human comprehension was already creeping up the shadows of the ridge. At some point in the dead of night on February 1st, time simply stopped. Inside the tent, the fire in the small stove had long since gone out. The hikers were huddled together, boots neatly tucked away, coats used as pillows. Then, without warning, an extreme, visceral terror, something that shattered their senses, descended upon them. The panic was so sudden, so total, that these seasoned survivalists didn't even reach for the tent zippers. Someone grabbed a knife and, in a frenzy, shredded the canvas from the inside. Rip. As the tent was hacked open, these Arctic experts made a decision that was, logically, a suicide mission. They sprinted into a -30°C blizzard without coats, without fire, and in some cases without even socks. When rescuers arrived 3 weeks later, the scene was a haunting tableau. The tent stood like the skeletal remains of a gutted beast, half buried in snow. Inside sat their boots, their heavy fur coats, and a half-eaten slab of meat. Everything was orderly, yet everything screamed of madness. What could possibly drive 9 rational adults to choose a certain death by freezing over staying inside that tent? The footprints leading down the slope told a silent, heartbreaking story. They weren't scattered in panic. They were in a single file line, moving with a grim, rhythmic pace toward the tree line 1.5 kilometers away. Some prints were bare, some were just a single sock. On ice as hard as iron, every second was a razor blade cutting into their nerves. There was no sign of a predator chasing them. They seemed to be pulled down the mountain by some irresistible, unseen will. Halfway down, the reaper began his harvest. Rescuers found Dyatlov and 2 others face down in the snow, their fingers clawing at the ice as if, in their final moments, they realized the tent was their only hope and tried desperately to crawl back. The others vanished into the black shadows of a cedar forest. There, they lit a pitifully small fire. But something in the woods was worse than the cold. Under a massive cedar, 2 bodies were found with their palms rubbed raw and bloody. The branches of the tree were snapped off up to 5 meters high. Investigators realized these men had been frantically trying to climb, as if something on the ground was staring up at them. If the first 5 deaths were standard tragedies of the cold, the discovery of the final 4 members 2 months later, as the spring thaw began, pushed the case into the realm of true horror. Buried under 4 meters of packed ice in a ravine just 75 meters from the cedar tree, rescuers unearthed the final 4. They weren't just frozen. They looked like they had been through a war. Unlike their comrades on the surface, these 4 suffered catastrophic internal injuries. The autopsies silenced the room. One man's skull had been shattered by a colossal force. 2 others had their ribs crushed and lungs turned to pulp. It was as if they had been hit by a freight train at full speed or squeezed in the fist of an invisible giant. The most terrifying detail? There was no external bruising. Their bones were powdered, yet their skin was pristine. In 1959, there was no known force, save perhaps a massive pressure wave, that could cause such internal-only destruction. Then came the detail that haunts the case to this day. Lyudmila Dubinina was missing her tongue. Not just her tongue. Her eyes and parts of her facial tissue were gone. Chillingly, forensic evidence found congealed blood in her stomach, meaning her tongue was removed while she was still alive. She died in absolute silence, her voice stolen by whatever took her. The clothing on these final 4 told a story of desperate, primal survival. They had stripped the clothes off their already dead friends, tearing trousers into rags to wrap around their frozen feet. They were fighting to the very last second. But against what? No animal tracks were found. No signs of a struggle with local tribes. Then a Geiger counter began to scream. Their clothes were saturated with lethal levels of radiation. As the bodies were returned, the Soviet authorities clamped down with iron-fisted secrecy. What should have been a transparent investigation was swallowed by the shadows of the state. A total gag order was issued. But the cameras found in the tent became the key to the abyss. When investigators developed the final roll of film, the room went cold. The first few shots were joyous, skiing, laughing, building the camp. But the final frame was an anomaly. A blurry, chaotic image of luminous orange orbs hovering in the pitch-black sky. It was shot in a panic, as if the photographer's hands were shaking with terror. Were these orbs hovering over the tent that night? 50 kilometers away, another hiking group reported seeing those same glowing spheres in the northern sky. Even the border guards and meteorologists saw them. More baffling still, rescuers found a flashlight sitting on top of the snow outside the tent. It didn't belong to any of the 9 members, and the battery was still full. Beside it lay an extra ski pole that wasn't on the inventory. This suggests a terrifying possibility. that while the 9 were running for their lives, a 10th man, someone never mentioned in the logs, was standing there, watching them. Other clues surfaced. Why was the bark of the cedar tree stripped off? Why did the victim's skin have a strange, deep tan orange hue? When lead investigator Lev Ivanov insisted the fireballs were the cause of death, he was immediately removed from the case. All evidence was crated into boxes marked top secret and shipped to Moscow. Rumors of a secret missile test or a high-energy vacuum bomb experiment spread like wildfire. But if it was just a military accident, why stage such a bizarre, nonsensical, natural scene instead of just making the bodies disappear? "60 years have passed. The original players are dust, but the Dyatlov Pass incident remains an open wound in the history of the unexplained. In 2019, under immense pressure, the Russian government reopened the case. Using modern physics, they proposed a new, terrifyingly scientific theory, the infrasound trap. They suggested that the unique topography of the Mountain of the Dead, combined with the gale force winds, created something called a Kármán vortex street. This generated infrasound, a frequency below 20 Hz. While humans can't hear it, our bodies feel it. It vibrates the inner ear and organs, triggering a state of primal, uncontrollable dread, localized nausea, and vivid hallucinations of impending doom. Imagine being in that dark tent when the sound of the Reaper begins to vibrate through your very bones. Your heart races, your lungs feel crushed, and your mind screams that the air itself is an enemy. In a state of collective madness, they shredded the tent to escape a ghost that was actually just the wind. They likely fell into the ravine in the dark where the weight of a sudden snow slump acted like a hydraulic press, crushing their bones. But does science explain everything? If it was just the wind, why the radiation? If it was just an accident, why the 30-year cover-up? To this day, many families believe the dark theory, that these young people were collateral damage in a Cold War conspiracy. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time, witnesses to a secret that could have shifted the balance of power, and they had to be silenced. The lone survivor, Yuri Yudin, passed away in 2013 with a heavy heart. Before he died, he was asked what he would say to his friends if he could. He was silent for a long time, then whispered, "If I could ask God one thing, it would be, what did my friends really see that night?" The mystery of Dyatlov Pass remains frozen in the winter of 1959. 9 young lives, forever claimed by the Mountain of the Dead. And when the winds howl through the Urals today, it's said you can still hear their whispers beneath the snow, a haunting reminder of the limits of our logic and the terrifying power of the unknown. The truth has faded with the blizzard, but the fog remains. I'm Aruafi, taking you deep into the unknown. I'll see you in the next one.